My father-in-law died in a plane crash just about 25 years ago. And it was shocking. It was scary and terrifying and horrific and tragic and all of those things. And when he died in a plane crash, what I needed was empathy. I needed not somebody to tell me it was going to be okay. I didn't need somebody to figure out why it happened right then, even though that is the very question that when tragedy strikes, you want. And so this week there's plane crashes, not often, but enough that, I just have to figure out how I want to engage in that. And this week has felt really hard. I was trying to figure out what felt different about this particular tragedy that connected to my experience with, his name was Tony, with Tony's death. And they're very different circumstances. Tony was the pilot and his wife was on the plane, and he managed to land in a field and not injure other people. It was just the two of them. And they were very important, obviously, to us. And when that happened, again, what I needed was empathy. Eventually, we needed to figure out what happened. And then this week I had a conversation with another leader that has to make some really difficult staffing changes that impact her staff and impact her clients and impact how her income and her business. And what she needed, as I was talking to her, was empathy. Yes, we needed to figure out why this was happening and how she was going to move forward. But what she really needed first was empathy. And empathy is being able to sit with the feelings of others and not solve. And what we all needed, both when Tony's plane crashed and this leader who is leading a business, was time to process, to feel all of the crazy feelings, because grief is nowhere near linear. It is basically like a whack-a-mole game of anger, acceptance, shock, and it comes in all kinds of forms. And as we process that information, yes, there were times to make changes, but we needed to find information that was genuine and real, but also make information and share those changes in a way that preserved people, preserved relationships, and put people in the center. What we did not need was a spectacle. We did not need grand performative gestures of basically power. And as I was thinking about this week and this plane crash and the connection to Tony and this conversation with a leader who is having to make really difficult leadership decisions, I couldn't get past the fact that as a leader, we have to remember that real people are impacted by decisions. Not an othering that dehumanizes people, not, like this is what it's going to do for me and my power. Power-hungry people put themselves and their interests in the center as the most important thing. That nothing else is more important than how is it going to benefit them. That's what power-hungry people do. even if they're in positions of leadership. That's not a leader. A leader serves people. Leadership at its core is serving people to get a group goal accomplished, to accomplish something with and through other people. That's leading. Which is why you have to lead yourself first. I say that all the time. And I can imagine, if you're listening, hi Rachel, that you've been impacted by someone's leadership decision. And some decisions, in fact, many decisions, don't feel good in the moment, even if they're good decisions. And in the middle of wrestling with the decisions after the plane crash with Tony, we had to decide, am I going to work the next day? How are we going to get to the other side of the state for a funeral? Do we have to identify a body? Praise God for his fellow firefighters who came and did that for us. We needed that because we had a lot of really big decisions to make. We needed the empathy of others. And leadership decisions are hard. They're complex often, and they require us to put people in the center. Real leadership requires empathy in decision making. Yes, we needed to figure out, how did Tony's plane crash? That was something we had to do. That wasn't the first response. That, even though, again, as humans, we want to know why. We want to make sense of it. We don't want to feel the hard emotions of it. We don't want to do that. But that's what we needed. And I'm so grateful for the people around us who did that. And what we figured out later in the process was that a vacuum pump failed. And that there were some circumstances around this particular plane that he was flying that it didn't get checked. We don't really know, because my father-in-law with Tony was very much Mr. Safety, but that's not something in your checks before you take off as a pilot. And so when you are a leader, yes, you have to figure out what happened, but it is not a blame game, and it is not a space where your interests are in the center. As a leader, again, you are serving people to help find a common goal at the end. And I know that you're like, what? This kind of feels a little all over the place. Just today, I was thinking about this so much. I woke up thinking about my father-in-law and the 25 years that he has missed with my family. How proud he would be of what we're all doing. And how painful it is when you lose someone. And that the 64 people who were on that plane were very important to other people. And I couldn't help but connect it to this conversation with a leader who is running a business that has to make some really hard decisions. And that as someone who loves and supports her, and as a coach and who works in leadership, first she needed some empathy. And she already had the empathy for her team. That was who she is as a human. And so if you are a leader, it can be very tempting to remove emotions and not enter into what are the emotions around big decisions. When you face tragedy, it can be very tempting to remove the emotions and say, well, why did this happen? And approach it with a sheer thinking brain and not engage in the emotions. And what happens is that you hurt people and you tend to make poor decisions. And I think if you do any kind of looking at how our Federal Aviation Administration runs, you will see a direct result between someone who is making decisions and putting themselves in the center versus how do I serve people well? And you as a leader don't need that. You don't have to do that. You will make better decisions when you are empathetic. And you're like, how does this impact people? Now, sometimes people are impacted negatively and you can't do anything about it. And that is true. And there is a way to be a leader, to make hard decisions that impact real people with great empathy and a plan that takes time so relationships are preserved and people are protected as much as you can, rather than coming in and slashing and burning. I'm really glad that when Tony died, that people didn't come in like a wildfire and try to make all kinds of changes. That we had empathy. There were people around us that supported us in those decisions. Some really great leaders and friends who came around us. And I don't normally go live. This isn't I go live once a month, but this isn't my typical Instagram deal anymore. I just couldn't get past how this felt, and that there's a lot of overwhelm happening. There's a lot that is deep and hard that leaders are going through and that you are probably facing as well. And so if you have an experience with this, I would love for you to share. If you're willing to put it in the comments, if you're like, hey, here's what I have experienced, here's how I got through that. It reminds us that leaders have to make hard decisions, that you're not alone as a leader, because leadership is really lonely sometimes. I would really encourage you to tag someone that needs some empathy or might need to hear this message, because that caring, again, brings us together and puts people in the center. And then if you're making tough decisions right now, if you're like, oh gosh, I have got this set of circumstances at work and I'm a leader and it's really hard. I got to figure that out. Send me a DM. I'll send you some voice notes with some ideas. We can talk about it, but I'll definitely give you some empathy, because you will make better decisions in the long run when you have genuine empathy for the people in your life and the people around you and the people who are impacted by your decisions. Even if you don't know who they are, you can still have empathy for them. There's a lot happening in the world right now. There's a lot happening personally in my life and my business. And I've talked to a few people this week that haven't experienced that. And I know that showing up empathetic, honoring people's humanity first, that's how I'm going to show up. Not irregardless, because that's not a word, regardless of what they deserve. Because I believe they deserve empathy. They deserve their humanity. And that's what I'm saying a leader does. That's what a leader does. We're in a leadership crisis because we're not treating people as people. We hardly know ourselves, let alone others. So if you're in those places, you're not alone. You're not alone. I look back at when Tony died. We were newly married. We didn't have kids. My sister-in-law lived with us. And so I lived with the two people whose father had just died. And I had known him since I was 4. And I am so grateful that we had people who just came and sat with us, who helped us have empathy in the decisions, who had empathy for us and did the real work of leadership. And that made a difference in the solutions that were created. And so this week, if you've got some hard stuff, know that you're not alone. Let us know. Happy to talk with you if you're like, oh, I can't share that publicly, but would you help me? send me a DM. I'm happy to talk to you. I don't really know how to end this because at this point I feel like I'm just going to repeat myself. And I think actually what just came to me is Henry Nouwen and a quote that he says, "We have exchanged love for power." And I would add to that, that is a terrible exchange rate. So let's go back. Let's put love in the center.